Right, welcome to day 18 of 30 of the program. We are in week 4, day 3. We are focused on exceeding expectations. We've got our strategy in place, and now we're working on the implementation piece and setting ourselves up for effectively scaling our execution when we are directly responsible for that execution. Yesterday, we talked about the different roles that we played in our lives and how to leverage them in order to improve the time quality or the experience of the time increments or inputs that we're using in order to generate more or better outputs. We talked about real productivity at the beginning of this week. Today, this is the next couple of days are going to be about boundary setting and commitment so that you can start to make sure that you're boxing out the increments of time and also reducing frustration when you're in those time boxes and by not having distractions or interference from others. And that's going to be the focus of today in terms of the differences between reactive and proactive time management, how to move from more of a reactive time management approach to proactive time management approach. So, I'm sure this is something everyone feels within their career at some point. It's just this frustration of fielding this flood of things or requests from other people that just are not priorities to you, but might be priorities to other people, or they think that it's priorities to them. And it's just being added to your schedule. And all of a sudden, in order to get the priorities done that you need to get done, you're just adding more time and you're taking away from the other roles in your life, and you're creating less of a quality experience for yourself, people that you work with, potentially your direct reports, management team, etc. So if you want to have a strong leadership practice, you need to stand up for this and you need to manage it as part of your work experience and your leadership practice. So just think of this in terms of money or productivity. Like, reactive time management is time, quantity, expensive, right? And if you are calculated at a certain hourly wage based upon your salary and you're dedicating hours in order to execute the work of other people that are their priorities, but maybe are not directly aligned to the targets that you define, which if you've done right are aligned to the core and the major gaps in the organization, and you're intending to have a massive impact by the deliverables that you're creating. So it's not only expensive for you, it's expensive for your organization and your team to have you focus on these things. It's ultimately not key to your success. I'm sure that's why you feel frustrated and demotivated when you've got these flood of inconsequential requests. We could talk about, I'll talk about it for a moment right here, going off on a little bit of a learning tangent, which can be important. Another way to look at the flood of the requests is almost similar in terms of your research exercise for defining your targets. Is you could get data on like what's happening and what potential core problems there are and huge gaps there are by some of the flood of these requests that are coming in. You can take it as an opportunity to reach out to some of these people that are requesting this and having these conversations that we talked about in week 3, the questions and grid. This is another opportunity to turn this problem into an opportunity, so using it towards your advantage. So it's another way to think about this, especially if you're still in your planning phase and understanding like what targets you should set for exceeding expectations. It's almost like inbound leads. It's just sometimes you won't be sure of the quality of the leads. So you could kind of twist this to your advantage and have these conversations with these people that are flooding you with requests, and really get at the strategic work that they're doing and how you might be able to contribute more to lead work. So you can kind of put this on its head and use it as an opportunity. But for the rest of the conversation today, what we're going to focus on is if that is not the case, and let's say you've already defined your targets, you committed to them, you reached out to your stakeholders, you told them the adjustments that you're going to be making, you set certain expectations with them, and now you need to be focused on executing those things, because it is definitely a different process or a different type of experience or relationship management that you would need to handle if you need to start switching expectations with people that you've made commitments to. So, some of these things that come in ultimately, if you don't pay attention to them or you don't do them, people can lodge complaints or complain to your manager or their manager, and then your manager start talking. And that can create a perception about the experience of working with you, whether it's justified or not. So we want to proactively handle these situations in order to manage some of these potential risks, but really to create the space for you to devote the most important increments of time that you have to the targets that you've set. And so what does it mean, like proactive, and why does it cost some time? Well, proactive costs some time because you need to do a little bit of planning. And a form of proactive time management is time boxing, and we'll go in depth on that tomorrow. But it's really all about setting these boundaries while telling other people that you value them, by keeping them in the loop and devoting time to them. And again, this is an opportunity in terms of the experience that's working with you and how you handle this flood of requests or staying on top of it so that you can create the lane for the work that you need to do. So there's going to be a little bit of an investment up front in order to manage this, but that little bit of investment is going to create a much larger lane for you later in the week or in the weeks and the months ahead if you don't develop this as part of your leadership practice. And I'll get into a little more detail in a moment. So how do you create this lane for yourself? How do you proactively manage your time so that this flood of input and requests aren't destroying your calendar every week? Time boxing. We'll talk about that tomorrow. So literally putting boxes of time in your calendar based upon the roles that you want to play and executing against that. And that's been a phenomenal approach for me, especially when I coupled it with the roles. Some people just do it in terms of tasks. I think at an executive level, just focusing on tasks is highly demotivating. As I mentioned yesterday, I talked a moment about that. Looking at task lists really sometimes is not inspiring. It could be demotivating. So proactively communicating your priorities. We talked about communication in terms of adjustments. These are methods for your priorities. The adjustment communication also, you are holding yourself accountable to the meet expectation targets that you're setting, and you're communicating the targets and the adjustments to your stakeholders. So those become the priorities. So the people that have authority and influence over your career, your role, and what you're doing, they are informed and consulted about what your priorities are. So you're making them aware of what you're already focused on. So if that somebody does complain to someone, they already know what you're focused on and what to expect from you, and may pre-handle any objections about getting access to your time, because they can help to explain the story on your behalf and let this person know that they need to focus their requests elsewhere or handle their priorities in a different way. Proactively communicating what you are responsible for. Similar thing, like the adjustments, the methods, like what are you doing? What are you responsible for? Communicating that to your stakeholders based upon what you did in the prior week. And you can continue to do that like through updates, like where are you against those adjustments, those responsibilities, against the targets for meeting expectations that you set. This reminds people what your priorities are. And let's say it's a person that is constantly asking for your time, let's say on a weekly, daily basis, reaching out to you. You can do a few things. The first thing that you can do is to offer to do a check-in with them at the beginning of the day. Let them know what is the priorities that you have for the day, what you're focused on, working on for that day. This is also, dependent upon the power dynamic. If you're more senior than this person, or there's no direct connection to them, might not be worthwhile to do this, but simply informing these people what you're working on and what your priorities are at a specific cadence, and staying ahead of that, like not waiting for them to send the requests in, but informing them, hey, I'm working on this week. These are my priorities. Lets them know what you're focused on and closes the door more on their ability to reach out and say something to you. The other method is, if you're in a role where you have a manager, assuming most of us do, even CEOs do, it's called the board. Having conversations between managers of the two people involved to understand the priorities, and to either stop the communications that are happening and that are taking away from your time, and helping the person understand that perhaps they can't reach out to you for these types of things, or not in this way. It has to be structured in a different way. Perhaps your team has some type of prioritization mechanism, and you look at priorities of tasks and targets on a quarterly basis. And if people have asks for your team, they have to attend these prioritizations and give them the opportunity. This also lets either this format or a format of communicating out your priorities to these people, lets them know the context of their asks, that they are competing against a series of other priorities that are assigned to stakeholders, and you can include stakeholder assignments. So let's say you have 5 priorities, 5 responsibilities, 5 targets that you define that you're actively working on, including the stakeholders that have expectations around these things from you, helps to put this person's request within context, and then saying, if this needs to be prioritized amongst these things, I suggest we have a meeting with our managers to discuss the prioritization. And if this is an ongoing problem, as one of the things in that discussion between the managers and you and the other person is that these types of requests need to come in a different way, or these types of requests that are being asked should not be asked of you or the team in general. Another thing to think about here in terms of your level of seniority and your leadership practice, if you're a really senior person, the leaders above you, the more senior leaders, are going to expect you to manage this yourself, right? This is not going to be the type of thing that they're going to want brought to them to solve. So 2 leaders need to, let's say your peers or someone's more senior than you, this is something that if you are a senior leader, you might need to manage with yourself before escalating it to managers. Like, these types of things need to be worked out by leaders, and standing up for yourself. We'll talk a little bit about this in communications, this concept of worrying about getting burnt based upon what you communicate and how that may impact your authenticity. You're going to need to stand up for yourself. So an example of that would be to let this person know that this is something I can't support you on right now based upon all the other priorities I have on my plate. I'm doing a prioritization exercise at the end of the quarter. We can talk about this, and then I can see if I could support your team, or this responsibility does not fall on myself or my team. It's something I cannot support. Consider reaching out to this team to help you. If you're not familiar with this team, I can make a recommendation for you. So that approach, that example that I just gave you, works in the concepts of being direct and empathetic. So letting the person know what the situation is, but also understanding the situation that they're in and giving them a lead or help them along the way, to giving them an equitable opportunity to solve their problem. You know, it's about the experience with you. So I've walked through several things and looking at the flood of requests, this reactive time management, and turning it into opportunities to build your leadership brand. You need to adapt these things to certain situations. But the point is to stay ahead of it. And one of the ways to stay ahead of it is to communicate to different groups of people what you're doing, what your targets are, who your stakeholders are. And if they do make requests from you that you feel do not fit in those priorities, using the different methods that I just discussed in order to field those requests. And remember, time is the currency of your life, right? If somebody's asking you to spend your time, act like your life depends on it, because it does. You're spending the one thing in your life that is, in terms of a quantity measurement, is a measure of your life. So protect your time. Use these proactive measures to stay ahead of these requests, to manage expectations of other people around you by leveraging the expectations that you've set with others. These are some approaches to proactive time management. Time boxing is another. We'll get into that tomorrow. That basically says to everyone that looks at your calendar, I have commitments, whether they're meetings or not, to certain things. So if you want my time, you need to make the case for it. All right, so today's exercise, putting things into practice. Again, practice it and then apply it in your practice. In your leadership practice. So ideate on proactively protecting your time. I gave you some examples. I shared the concepts. Now apply it. Pick a situation, apply it, and make it happen. All right, including for today. Tomorrow, we're going to move on to time boxing. This is going to start to combine time, quantity, and quality. And if you do time boxing correctly, and if you do this piece correctly, you may find, like I have in the past, that when you get to Friday, you look back and you're like, wow, I accomplished all this stuff. I actually have like some extra time. What should I work on? So that's a good space to be in. You will feel highly accomplished. And it'll make you feel like you're in control of your own destiny and that you're focused on your targets. So I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation tomorrow and sharing time boxing with you.